But if the market is so important, how come we still need to have the government there? It is because economic development is a process of structural transformation, industrial upgrading, industrial diversification. In that process, there's a lot of things called coordination. That is that you need to improve the infrastructure, port facilities. Individual trader will not be able to do that. You need to have a government, or you need to have a trade association in like Hamburg, a free state. Again, it's a state, even it's an association of the traders. To improve those kind of infrastructure, and also institutions like financial sectors, like a legal system, and so on. And individual firm cannot internalize all those changes. And also, in the process of industrial upgrading and diversification, if the industry want to be competitive, you need to have some kind of agglomeration to have some kind of clusters. And there are so many industries which are consistent with your competitive advantages. If you allow things to happen spontaneously, then private firm may enter into too many sectors, and its sectors so thin, no cluster, no agglomeration. So the government need to give some incentive in order to encourage firm to go into certain sectors, and the sectors can have large enough number of firm and to firm cluster. And also, industrial upgrading or diversification is an innovation. And innovation always has some risk. First mover always has some kind of disadvantages. And you need to overcome those kind of disadvantages, that is the externality. So the government need to facilitate. And that's the reason why we need to have a facilitating state. And from this kind of basic understanding of the new structural economics, we can tie the status effects of the previous findings very well. Because according to the new structural economics, the policy recommendation is that to follow your competitive advantages, and you need to have a market economy, you need to have a facilitation state. And that is actually the status fact number 4 and number 5 of Gross Commission report. And if you follow your competitive advantages, certainly it will be an open economy. And in industrial upgrading process, you can tap into the potential of advantage of backwardness. And that is status number 1, status fact number 1 of the Gross Commission report. At the same time, if you follow your competitive advantage, you will be most competitive. And under that kind of situation, you are going to have less homegrown crisis. And if you have an external crisis as you have now, the government will have a much larger room for counter-cyclical intervention. And so they are going to have a much better macro stability. And the last one is that if you follow your competitive advantages, you will be most competitive, you can generate the largest possible profit, so you're going to have more to say. And as I explained, the rate of return to investment will be the highest, so you're going to invest more. So again, that is consistent, the status effect of number 3. Here is that. Michael Spence, after complete this Gross Commission report, and he often say, success has some ingredients, but no recipe. I think the reason why he say no recipe because he doesn't have a framework to tie those status facts together. And I like to say, there's a recipe. The recipe is to follow your competitive advantages. And the ingredients, 2 are the precondition, 3 are the consequence of follow the competitive advantages. And certainly this is also consistent with the East Asia miracle, export orientation, because you are open economy, you follow competitive advantages, and you are going to have a facilitating government. Okay, from this new structural economics, we can understand why the old structural recommendation, import substitution strategy did not work. Because import substitution strategy, the old structuralism, was the old industrial policy, in general tried to advise the government to develop sectors which are too advanced, which go against their competitive advantages. And because of that, those sectors go against their competitive advantages. Firms in those kind of sectors are not viable in open competitive market. Because they are not viable, so the government need to give them a lot of protection and subsidies to give them monopolies. As a result, the resource allocation was poor, but created huge rent. So you're going to have rent seeking, you have all kind of corruption and political capture. So that was the reason why the old structuralism failed. And this can also help understand how come Washington Consensus also failed. It was because Washington Consensus was introduced as a way to reform countries which practice the policy recommendation of old structuralism. In general, they have some kind of import substitution strategies. They develop up some kind of import substitution sectors, which are better advanced, but firms in those kind of sectors are not viable. And they have a lot of those kind of firms. But the Washington Consensus did not recognize those kind of indigeneity. So the recommendation was to remove all those kind of distortion. But if you remove all those kind of distortion, those firms are going to go bankrupt immediately. You're going to create a huge unemployment issue. I'm sure that people in Germany have a lot of experiences of the Eastern Germany. When you remove all those kind of protection, most firms just go bankrupt. And unemployment will be huge. And Eastern Germany, certainly, they are lucky because Western Germany pays so much money to bail them out or to give the, unemployment benefit and so on. But most other developing countries, they did not have those kind of opportunities. So either you're going to face huge unemployment, social instability, and political instability, or the government need to continue to subsidize them in an even more disguised way. And those kind of more disguised way were even less efficient. So that's the reason why the Washington Consensus did not do well. And if you look into the successful country, I mentioned in general they adopt certain kind of dual-track approach. That is that the government in the reform transition process continue to provide certain kind of protection, subsidies to the oil sectors, so to maintain stability. But the government liberalized the entry to the sector which were repressed in the past. Those kind of sectors are consistent with their competitive advantages, like the labor-intensive sectors and so on. So they achieve stability and dynamic economics simultaneously. And this creates a condition to reform the oil sectors in this kind of gradual dual-track approach. Okay, so with this understanding, can we improve our development policies? As I mentioned, certainly the goal is to have a dynamic economic growth in order to reach prosperity and reduce poverty. And the recipe is to develop your industries according to your competitive advantages in order to achieve competitiveness domestically and internationally. And in the industrial upgrading process, as a country at the catching up stages, the industrial upgrading is an innovation, but they can benefit from, I think Gershon Krohn created the term, advantage of backwardness. So reduce the cost of innovation. That tapping into the potential of advantage of backwardness. And so if a developing country knows how to do that, they can have a growth rate not 2% per year. They can have growth rate of 8%, 9%, 10% per year. And the precondition is market economy and a facilitation state. And I think that if a developing country, I'm convinced, if a developing country follow these recipes and have this kind of approach, they can achieve 8%, 9%, or 10% per year. And it demonstrated from Japan to Korea to Taiwan, and then to mainland China to Vietnam, now to India. And I'm sure African countries should also have that opportunities. Any country, any developing country should have that opportunities. And in this process, industrial policy can be an effective tool. Certainly, most industrial policy in the past failed, as I mentioned. And the reason why they failed was because they wanted to go against their competitive advantages. But if industrial policies follow your competitive advantages, it's a useful tool. And because in the process of industrial upgrading, you need to have a lot of coordination issue. And also because in a developing country, their infrastructure were poor, their institutions were backward. And in this upgrading process, you need to improve that. Certainly, if possible, you want to improve everything. But the government capacity is limited. So it's better to restrict in the area which related to the industry you want to develop. What are their requirements? And also, industrial policy can encourage the formation of clusters to turn the industries not only consistent with your competitive advantages, but can also reduce its cost of transaction and to be competitive. Okay, but industrial policy to be successful need to aim the right industries. And the right industry need to be the industry which are consistent with your competitive advantages, but because of lack of coordination, those kind of competitive advantage has not demonstrated. Or that kind of industry I call latent competitive advantages. But how to do that? And history gives us some guidance. Because I like to say, all the successful countries which complete their catching up process, their government always are proactive, always have some kind of industrial policies. And I like to say, in general, there are industrial policies, spontaneously or unintentionally, they all follow what I say, latent competitive advantages. I could like to start it. Before the Industrial Revolution, we know Netherlands was more advanced than Britain. And they are wool, textile industry, and so on. And Britain wanted to catch up Netherlands in the 16th, 17th century. Britain government was very proactive. But at that time, their per capita income was already about 70% of Netherlands per capita income. So the income gap was not too far. And after the Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, after the Industrial Revolution, Britain became the most advanced country. Germany, at that time called Prussia, and US, France wanted to catch up the UK's industries. The government will all introduce all kind of facilitation, all kind of industrial policies. And they were successful. And their per capita income was already 60% to 75% of UK's per capita income. And according to Gershon Kron, he studied that Russia, Poland, Hungary, Serbia also wanted to have similar government facilitation to develop similar industry as Germany wanted to develop that time, or France or US wanted to develop that time. But they failed. There are many explanations. My explanation is very simple. Because at that time, Poland's income, Russia's income was only about 20% or 30% of Britain's per capita income. But Prussia, France, and the US, their per capita income was 75%, 60%. And it's so much closer.